The views and opinions of this broadcast do not reflect the views and opinions of Armed Media, New Productions and its affiliates. Enjoy the show.
Teflon Pan Man. I'm the Teflon Pan Man. Ain't nothing gonna stick on me.
Yes, good evening, everyone, and welcome to All You Can Eat, the podcast about deliciousness, really. And I am your host, Rob Rosenthal, coming to you on Wednesday, as always, the 19th day of September. Coming to you from New York City, and this is episode number 27. And I wanted to start off today with a couple of things related to last week, which I was fortunate enough to spend in two fabulous European cities. First, London, England, and then I followed that with 4 or 5 days in Paris, France, both of which, I've been to before, and both of which and anybody who has been will tell you are really fabulous cities, each in their own way. And I want to tell you a little bit about London, what was going on there, particularly from the standpoint of what I ate, obviously. Then Paris, which obviously will contain some stories about food because, wow, it's still so great to eat in Paris, as it is in London, by the way. And then later on in the podcast here, we're going to talk a little bit about sake, because October, I guess, is National Sake Month, and I have the opportunity to interview a guy whose name is, what is his name? Martinez, I'm pretty sure. I'm sorry I threw that away. I'm interviewing a sake expert, incidentally, a guy who knows a lot about it. So I will include that and get to learn a little bit about sake. First, let's start with last week in London, England. And this time of year, I got to say, lucky on the weather. Mid-September in London, still pleasant. In fact, almost perfect. I mean, I suppose if you wanted to wear a sweater when it was in the low 60s, you could do that. But I was happy going around in a short sleeve shirt. And London is still so, sophisticated, and people were super pleasant. And their subway system there, their underground, the tube is just easy to use and super efficient. Everywhere I looked, of course, they have, as they do in so many major cities these days, bike racks where you get to essentially take out a bike. And I found a perfect day to go grab one of the local bikes. And I was able to ride around Hyde Park, which is just fantastic, really just one of the great, beautiful parks of the world. So that was great. I think when I go to London and I think about food, and that food scene has changed dramatically since I started going there, 25 years ago. There's a lot of great food. That wasn't always the case. You used to go to London and you knew that you were going to have some fish and chips. And eventually, if you were paying attention, you were going to go have some really fabulous Indian food. And then you expanded that into having, kind of like your Middle Eastern, like your kebab type stuff. And now, you have all of that, and there are also some just like world-class restaurants in there, one of which I was fortunate enough to attend. I'll tell you about that. But there was a place for cocktails that I was super impressed with called The Ned. So for those of you who are contemplating a trip anytime in the near future to London, you may want to check out The Ned. Old building, I'm going to say 1930s, used to be a bank. They completely reconfigured the place, and it is now essentially a giant hotel, social club, bar. There were 8 restaurants, and each had its own bar on the lower level. There was live music being played. It was a Monday night. That place was really buzzing. and really worth kind of checking out, even if you're just going for after work, happy hour, cocktails, music, scene, lovely, beautiful people. And apparently, if you were living there, you could join the private club operation. I mean, they had a place on the roof overlooking part of the city, gyms and all that kind of stuff. But even if you're just over there for kind of cocktails and the scene, that was really worth going to. The Ned. Went to a place like a hole in the wall kind of place that just basically made kebabs. And that's just delightful, where literally two people can split a dish of some kind of grilled, meat, chicken, lamb. It comes with all types of, the usual sauces. It comes with nice toasted pita. I think dinner that night was about $8.50 in their money, so probably $10 for two people, and it was just delightful. And which leads me, incidentally, into kind of the confession that even as a guy who has a professional culinary degree, and as someone who has been fortunate enough to eat in thousands and thousands upon thousands of restaurants the world over, I am essentially a simpleton when it comes to food. I don't need fancy. I don't pursue the expensive. In fact, it's just the opposite. I am most happy with a slice of pizza, a kebab if you're in that type of neighborhood. Love a good plate of pasta. The Chinese joint that's doing dumplings and noodles. This is all great to me. And yet, here I was in London, and things kind of came together in such a way that I was able to sneak in at the last moment to a restaurant called Core, literally Core. I had read about Core somewhere within 24 hours of the time that I booked it, and it had showed up as one of the top 50 restaurants in London. And I think one of the things that made it even yet more kind of intriguing than that was it showed up as number 3 of the best restaurants in London by whatever organization it is that's rating the top London restaurants year after year. And it was also given the distinction of having achieved a perfect score of 10, which apparently was the first time that a London restaurant on this list had achieved a perfect score its first time out of the box. So, I don't know, pushed a couple of buttons. Next thing I know, I'm able to get a reservation at Core by a woman. I forget her name, Smythe, her first name, the chef's first name. A woman, Irish woman. And we go over there for dinner this past Tuesday night. And man, first of all, it's in I don't know if you would call it a townhouse, but it's not like you're walking into the usual type of restaurant scene. It's kind of genteel, you know what I mean? There's a front door, like you're going into 10 Downing Street, and the front door leads into the entranceway. Obviously, you're greeted by the greeter there, and you're in the room where they would be serving just cocktails, the bar area. And the greeting at the better places kind of sets the tone, to be honest with you. Have you ever walked into like a restaurant, and whoever was working at the front desk was kind of either unattentive or distracted, or just kind of not fully cognizant of your presence, or in some way. What the point that I make here is that can actually detract, and does detract, from your restaurant dining, eating experience. Well, here it's different. Walk in, gentleman says, welcome. I tell him who I am. Can I take your stuff? Take your bags, blah, blah, blah. I say, I'm waiting for someone. Here, go have a seat right over here at the table. The bartender is super pleasant. I ask him, because I'm in London town and it's time for an adult beverage, I ask him what type of gin they have, because I'm going to have a a perfect kind of classic proper martini. And he recommends a gin, which is made locally. I don't even think you can find it in this country. It's made with a gin called, I'm going to say Happle, Happle, or maybe it was Hipple. Let's do that, Hipple. And he makes me a very dry, as I had requested, martini with olives and a twist, because I like to eat while I drink. And I sit down in a very lovely, contemporary room with clean lines. And I sip on a perfect martini. They also bring to the table some smoked almonds, perfect little crunchy bits. And you can't help but notice that the toothpick that's holding the olives in the drink, this is made of metal. This is not one of those wooden toothpicks that you would pick your teeth with and then crumble in half and leave. This is like the whole thing just feels super classy. So I'm totally happy. And then my bride arrives, so we are taken inside to sit down in the dining room. And the dining room, even at that hour, is relatively early, about 7 o'clock, is already by that time filled up. With a crowd that I could, what I would describe as being well-to-do, which makes sense because the place is, honestly, it's super expensive. And I'm telling you in advance that I had an extraordinary meal, but you pay for it, which is why I preface this whole situation by saying that I'm happy having a kebab and a slice of pizza. But here's the thing, once a year, maybe twice, but definitely once, I like to go to a place that is like this, like cuisine, like not just a white tablecloth. I mean like serious food, and I do that basically because I think it's a way of kind of acclimating your palate. I think it's a way to kind of expand your horizons. I think it's interesting to taste food that's made at the highest possible level, even if you do it once a year, even if it's a special occasion. There's something exciting about what's possible in the world that's not just the simple homemade local type fare. In this particular case at Core, it's a prix fixe situation, so it's a tasting menu, but they actually do give you a choice. There's a tasting menu where there are going to be choices of 3 things, and they give you choices within each category. So you have a choice of like a starter, you have a choice of a main, you have a choice of dessert. There's a tasting menu that is composed of 5 elements, so you're going to get a little bit more like a second. Main dish or a principal dish and a second dessert in this case. And then they even have a larger tasting menu, which would be 7 courses, each priced obviously, respectively. And what's exciting is that even before your food comes that you order, they do bring to the table, regardless of whether you're going with the 3 or the 5 or the 7 course meal, they do bring to the table a number of things. That includes tomato and basil gougere. Gougere, I remember it well from French cooking school. It's a little puff ball of cheesy loveliness. I mean, honestly, on another night, martinis and gougere would be good. This one in particular was exciting because it had tomato in addition to the cheesiness, a little bit of tomato, a little bit of basil, and it's air. It's like a puff of air. And it's just outstanding and a delicious way to begin a meal. They also brought jellied eel with toasted seaweed and malt vinegar. And I know that for some people who are intimidated by the sound of that, it's still delightful, cold, and delicious. I love eel in almost any incarnation. And this was certainly a different incarnation than the ones that you would normally get at like a Japanese restaurant where it's oftentimes served, well, it's almost always served cooked. This was served, they probably cooked the eel, but it definitely served cold, and it was lovely and exhilarating on the palate, because that's what you want to do at the early part of the meal. Wake up the palate a little bit, and so the malt vinegar did that with this little bite of eel. And these are just bites, by the way. Then they also come up with some crispy smoked duck wings, burnt orange, and spices. Now, if you haven't had duck wings, may I suggest that you do? If you like chicken wings, I love duck wings. It's not that they're that common. It's not that they're that easy to find. But if somebody is serving them, get your hands on those. A lot of people, shy away from duck because they think that it's kind of too gamey. I don't have that impression. And once again, if I could go sit, and I'm not saying that you can't, but I could go back to this restaurant core, and I could order a martini and have gougere and duck wings, and feel like I'd be in heaven. They also brought as the fourth little taste before your meal, foie gras, parfait, and Madeira, and all I can say is foie gras, fat liver, if you will, is a thing of beauty. And so you have these little tastes before you maybe order some wine, and then you choose what it is that you're going to have from your tasting menu. My wife went with the 3-course. I went with the 5. Ordered some lovely wine from a nice wine list. They bring some bread and butter to the table, and once again, I would have, if they had kept bringing it, I might have kept eating it. I have a weakness for bread and butter, especially when bread and butter is this good. My first course, let's see, what did I have here? Scallop tartare, sea vegetable consomme. Yeah. Scallop tartare, I like scallops, and I like them cooked. And I have a recipe in my book called Scallops Provençal, where it's made with a little bit of tomato and white wine and butter and some spices, herbs from Provence. It's lovely. But I actually prefer raw scallop when I can get it. There's a place I went to 10 times up in Portland, Maine, that served scallops raw, right out of the scallop shell. It's one of the greatest foods I've ever had because not only is it sweet and light and delicate, it literally melts in your mouth. I love a raw scallop. Here, they're serving scallop from the Isle of Mull, wherever that may be, tartare, meaning obviously it is uncooked, and it came in a little sea vegetable consomme, and it's delightful, perfect, right? I had the skate. Next, the skate is with also served with a little tiny shrimp and some Swiss chard brown butter. It was perfect. It was perfect. The skin on this, there was skin. It was crispy. The little bit of shrimp gave it a sweetness. The brown butter made with Swiss chard was, it was just a beautiful piece of food, and reminds me that even before that, actually, they served me what is one of the chef's specialty. It's called potato and roe, and the potato and roe is a little potato. And it's filled with kind of like a herring and trout roe, and it's served in kind of a beurre blanc, and glorious food. After the skate, I went with the duck and nectarine, thyme, honey, and pepper, and I will say that it's cooked perfectly, which in this case is very medium rare. I think that if you didn't know you were eating duck and I gave you a taste of it, it would resemble like steak almost. But it's really a beautiful food, highlighted by the fruity sweetness of the nectarine. 2 desserts came. One was called cherry bakewell. I can't do justice to how to describe it. It's the kind of thing that if I looked at, I might not have ordered because it looks like a cherry, the size. It looks like a cherry, like the size of almost like a tennis ball, and it was filled with, you know what? By that point, it was one of her specialties, and it was awesome. And they also brought a pear and verbena with a Poire Williams sorbet, which is a Poire Williams like a pear liqueur. turned into a sorbet, and it was there was the pear that was roasted. There was this icy kind of sorbet. There was crunch in this thing. It was, and by the way, the food was so beautiful to look at that if it's true that you eat first with your eyes, you had no choice but to think that this was going to be delectable. But they really did deliver on the food. It was outstanding. Every single bite that I had, the service was extraordinary. The space was clean and modern kind of designed. The kitchen was open. As I said, I thought that the service and the staff were excellent, and so it was expensive. And I guess I kind of am obliged to say what it was. That cost, that tasting, that's 3 courses, is 85 British sterling. So let's call it $100. But I will say this, it was worth it. And so look it up. If you happen to be going to London, I cannot recommend it strongly enough. The restaurant is called Core, Core. You will find the chef's name in the title because it's Core by, I can't remember her first name, Smythe, Smyth, is the chef, and brilliant, as they would say, brilliant and outstanding. So that's the short story with London, a short trip but delightful, and then we decided that rather than hassling with a ride to the airport and a flight to Paris, that we were going to take the train. It was easy and comfortable and organized, and 2.5 hours, and boom, you're in the heart of Paris. Let me just say, for those inclined to travel, Paris in mid-September, man, it's perfect. It is gorgeous. Days are somewhere between 70 and 80, and sure, we were lucky, but yeah, the weather was great. And that's the thing, by the way. It's easily one of the most beautiful cities in the world, particularly at night. And I'm perfectly happy. You know, I mean, sure, culturally, it's amazing, right? You can go to the museums and go some of the greatest museums in the world, and you can find 1,000 cultural things to do. My favorite is still, on a particularly nice day, is to just go and walk. I'm sure that over the course of 3 or 4 days, I did 30 or 40 miles of walking. I mean, I was just happy to be out and about, moving from neighborhood to neighborhood, arrondissement to arrondissement, over and across and around the Seine River, over the bridges, into the Marais, into Saint-Germain-des-Prés, both sides, the right and left. What a treat it is always to be there. As many times as I've been, I enjoyed this trip there as much as I've enjoyed any. And you came in kind of late on Wednesday, not with an enormous appetite. So sat out at one of the classic old Parisian bistros or brasseries. Bought a nice bottle of rosé, some little bit of salad, perhaps some pommes frites, maybe a little bit of bread and beautiful butter. God bless. I will say that you're not going to go wrong with bread and butter. If I had to pick one city in the world just on the basis of bread and butter, it's going to be Paris. And frankly, that reminds me that to be Parisian, and this is from somebody that walked around the city for 3 or 4 days, it seems to me that you are either carrying, there's only like, every Parisian had something. It was either a baguette or a dog or a cigarette. That was pretty much what I saw for 3 days straight of the Parisians. The city is still great and still beautiful, still exciting to walk around, whether you're looking for boutiques or whether you're looking at art or the Jardin Tuileries, just beautiful, just fabulous, just great. Food-wise, what stood out was, well, I'll tell you, we went over to the restaurant called Le Coq Rico. Le Coq Rico. And I'm telling you something, man. The French take food so seriously, with such great care and such respect. The ingredients, as always, matter more than anything, and they have just outstanding ingredients, and they serve them simply, oftentimes, and elegantly, and oh man, I'll tell you, I was just happy everywhere that I went. Whether you have a little pain au chocolat, a little a croissant, whether you're having cheese or charcuterie and a glass of wine, which frankly I started at 4 o'clock. I was ready. 4 o'clock, I'm ready to sit down and start having some wine. Just fantastic places. But we ended up at dinner one night, and this is the meal that stood out over there, Le Coq Rico. Le Coq Rico is a restaurant in Montmartre, right? Which is a lovely, just happening, beautiful part of the city of Paris. Easy to access, and this place specializes. Le Coq is, of course, a chicken. This place specializes in chicken. Had I had an appetite, like a sufficient appetite, I would have had their platter of offal, livers, apple, and heart brochette, glazed wings, spicy poultry croquettes. I wanted it so badly, but I did not have the appetite to go with that and then follow it with the chicken, which I was there for. Nor did I have the appetite there to have any kind of soup, or the salad a la plancha chicken liver. Fresh chicken livers are a thing of beauty. Served here with heirloom tomatoes, watermelon, sesame seeds, and a lime vinaigrette. Did not have it. Didn't have the appetite for that. Sadly, got to go back. Roasted chicken, oysters, and gizzards. Again, that has my name on it. Served with artichokes, mushrooms, marinated and cooked in white wine with an herb blend and a lemon vinaigrette. Would have had that happily. Did not. Sadly. However, I was there for the roast chicken, the rotisserie bird. They're getting these chickens from, you can talk all you want about free range and natural and whatever kind of other ingredient. The chickens in France are the best that I've had. I had spent a number of years on expense account going to a restaurant called L'Ami Louis, famous for the birds, the chickens that came from Bresse. Dinner for two at that place, like used to be $500, probably more now. And you're eating a roast chicken and some pate and some beautiful fries and some wine. But it's crazy. This time around here, I am eating a chicken chalans, Challans. All the birds in this place are slowly cooked in a broth and then roasted on rotisserie. And they come together with your French fries and a green salad, or if you don't, you can have a macaroni gratin, which is their fancy way of saying mac and cheese, and even the salad. Honestly, the simple vinaigrette is beautiful. Just I love a simple vinaigrette on a salad. The French fries, needless to say, are flawless. The roast chicken is pretty much as good as any roast chicken I've ever had. Aged for 100 days, and they serve you either a quarter of it, which I had. 22 euros, man, for all of that. So I'm saying you're getting the chicken, you get a salad, you get the French fries, they're bringing the bread to the table with butter again. That was great. And it worked out perfectly because we ended up with a half a chicken since my wife had a quarter, and it was easy to split because I was having the dark meat. She was going for the white because she doesn't know any better. You can also have whole roasted birds there, so they're serving up to 3 people. And they also do have chicken from Bresse, 120-day age. And again, it's a whole bird. It'll serve 4 people. That one's 98 macros. And even that, I think you're serving 4 people for 98 euro. I forget what that's going to translate into, but let's call it 115, 120 smackers. Man, it's good, and as good as any chicken that I have ever had roasted. And that's the thing, by the way. I went to the French cooking school, and one of the things that I remember learning is that when chefs, particularly French chefs, wanted to test out potential new cooks to hire, they would often test them not on kind of the elaborate or the fancy creations, but rather on the simple. Can you make a perfect omelet? Not as easy as it sounds. Can you roast a perfect chicken? And so, anyway, here I am at Le Coq Rico having a perfect roasted chicken, French fries, perfectly green salad, and I could not be more happy. Le Coq Rico, which also, by the way, sometime recently opened a branch here in New York City, New York, which is very popular and very difficult to get in. But man, that is a beautiful, beautiful meal. So that is what was going down in Paris on a super perfect long weekend of immaculate weather and really gorgeous food. I would also like to call your attention to my shoes. I know that sounds kind of weird, but I mentioned earlier how much walking I did on this trip. I mean, other really than the biking around Hyde Park in London and some use of the underground in London. When it came to Paris, there was none of that. I was walking. I was walking 10, 12 miles a day over the course of 3 or 4 days. And to do that kind of walking, I can tell you that you need some comfortable shoes. Otherwise, you're going to be hurting. I don't like to walk around Paris in a pair of running sneakers. It's just kind of it doesn't look right to me. It feels a little touristy and déclassé, and you could say, okay, who cares? You know, the idea is to be comfortable, and that's fine. I don't in any way look down on those who want to do that. You must have comfortable shoes. You can't opt for fashion in exchange for having blisters. Now, this said, some time ago, I'm going to say 6 months or so, maybe around then, I got a package in the mail. And it was sent to me from my brother on the West Coast, and I don't know why, other than he was feeling generous and nice. He sent me a pair of shoes, knowing my size, I guess. And I put them on, and I tell you, one thing you could tell immediately about the shoes, they're pretty comfortable. Like cushiony, like floating on air type of thing. I don't know fashionable, I don't know not fashionable. I think my wife probably made fun of me because both of her parents have these shoes, and yet I took them with me to Paris, and they were so perfect, so comfortable, so great that I never really took them off. I wore nothing else on my feet over 4 days in Paris other than these shoes, Allbirds. And I thought, you know, because I had this image in my mind that was created for me from my wife that her parents were wearing them, but the truth of the matter is I mentioned it to some people who said, oh no man, those are cool, and they're fine, they're good. But it doesn't matter, frankly. I wasn't there for the fashion. The point that I'm going to make is, over the course of 40 or 50 or 60 miles, I was still pleased to put these on every morning. That's how comfortable they are. Allbirds.com, ALLBIRDS. Love your shoes, Allbirds. Just outstanding and perfect if you're going to walk anywhere for a very long time. On a completely different note here entirely, there's a couple of things that showed up in the New York Times this week that are worth kind of mentioning. One is this article, this profile on Andrew Zimmern, entitled Andrew Zimmern's Nonstop Road and Food Show. The star of TV's Bizarre Foods and dozens of other projects may be the fastest moving man in showbiz, but he is frank about the toll his breakneck pace has taken. I'm not going to take you through every detail, written by Kim Severson on September the 11th, so you're going to have to go back if you can access the article, but I think it's really worth reading. He's an interesting guy, Andrew, who's actually from New York City, New York, even though he's now been in Minneapolis for quite a while. He's all over the TV dial because he has multiple shows on the Travel Network, and I think a new one coming to the Food Network. And among the many things that you'll read about, if you happen to check it out, is that he had quite some life growing up, man. I mean, you kind of forget. I mean, I think I knew that he had a drug problem, but man, he really had some rough childhood, and then post college found himself hooked on heroin and stealing, and you know, I don't know. He ended up getting lucky because he went into rehab and remade his life, and he certainly deserves just a ton of credit for overcoming what he did. And not only is he doing television, but he gives speeches at facilities for people to give whether it be prison or rehabilitation facilities, to give them some hope and some inspiration from his experience. But anyway, if you haven't seen it, really super article on Andrew Zimmern in the New York Times. There's also, because this time of year, you're going to end up seeing an awful lot of cherry tomatoes out in the markets and in your groceries and that kind of thing. I caught a recipe here also in the Times that I will look forward to making as well. One pot spaghetti with cherry tomatoes and kale. Now, if you think you don't like kale or it's overused, I know that by the time I tell you what the recipe is, spinach is an option. But here's what we learned from this 20-minute recipe here for 4 servings, right? So a simple recipe: raw pasta and cherry tomatoes are simmered together in a single pan. So we like that, right? Because one pan cooking is like the best. You don't have to clean up a lot. Cooking the pasta and forming a thick starchy sauce at the same time. This efficient technique is internet famous, but this is the British cookbook author Anna Jones' simple vegetarian take on the phenomenon, adopted from her book, A Modern Way to Cook. The technique is easy to master and endlessly adaptable. When you add the kale, you could also toss in a couple of anchovies and a generous pinch of red chili flakes. When you season and top with cheese, you could add a pile of fresh chopped herbs like mint, basil, or oregano. How good does that sound? Here's what you do, because it's only a 2-stepper. You're going to need a pound of spaghetti and a pound of cherry tomatoes, which you're going to cut in half. A couple of lemons, which you've zested. That's important. Can't tell you how much flavor comes out of that. A quarter of a cup plus 3 tablespoons of olive oil. Then you're going to want some salt. You need a bunch of either kale or spinach, the leaves only, that you've washed and chopped. Salt and pepper, Parmesan cheese. I mean, that's it, right? I like it. I like anything that's like limited ingredients, one pot cooking. And in this case, it's pasta, tomatoes, which are plentiful, a green like your kale or your spinach, and hit up with some herbs and some Parmesan. Man, this is good. Step 1: bring just over a quart of water to a boil. Meanwhile, put the spaghetti, the tomatoes, the lemon zest, the oil, and the salt in a large, dry, shallow pan. You got me? Pan should be large enough so that the dry spaghetti can lie flat in it. Step 2, your final step. Add hot water to the pan with the spaghetti, cover the pan, and bring up to a boil. Remove the lid and simmer for about 6 minutes using tongs to move the spaghetti around now and then so it doesn't stick. Then add your kale or your spinach and continue cooking until the remaining liquid has reduced to a sauce and the pasta is cooked through. Taste, season, and top with cheese. That does not sound bad at all. So there you go. I had the chance to speak with Alfredo Martinez. He is the beverage director at an operation called Raw Sushi. They own, it's probably the largest chain of sushi restaurants in America, and he's an expert in particular on sake. So I thought, you know what, let's learn a little bit of something about sake. What I will say about it is first that I'm in love with it. Now, in the early part of Japanese food coming to this country, I remember having sake, and it was always served hot or warm. And then eventually, what became available was cold sake. And to be honest, as I said to him, once I went cold, I never went back. I love sake. The problem with sake is that it's, if you think we have a hard time figuring out what wine to have when they bring a wine list to the table, imagine what happens when they bring that list and it's all in Japanese characters. So we have a long way to go to understanding sake and all the different variations and alternatives and tastes and all that kind of thing. So take a listen here to my conversation with Mr. Martinez on the subject of sake.
Hey, Alfredo.
Good afternoon, Mr. Rosenthal. How are you doing today?
Good afternoon, Mr. Martinez. I'm doing quite well, thank you. How about yourself?
Very, very good. Very good. Thank you so much for having me today.
Thank you for doing it. When I had the opportunity to talk about sake, I wanted to take advantage of that because I'm a fan of the product. But I suspect, like many Americans at least, we don't know a whole lot about it. So before we talk about what you're doing over at Raw Sushi, where you are the beverage director of a big operation, which we're gonna come to. Let me just ask you some general questions to give people some kind of context. What is sake actually, and how is it made?
Okay, so sake, it's a fermented beverage, similar to beer. I think one of the biggest misconceptions about sake is that we continuously call it rice wine, and it's good as a reference, but in being more specific, it's actually brewed more like a beer. So a lot of the same rules for quality beer will apply to sake with a big twist. And so you're looking at different types of rice grains. You can do it basically with short grain rice or any different type of rice grain that you would have available. But in Japan, there's some very specific clones that they had been using for the last 50, 80 years to produce high-quality sake. Then you're looking at water sources. So different parts of Japan have different water sources, and that's going to have an impact on the taste of the product at the end. And then lastly, the yeast is very important, similar for winemakers when selecting the right yeast and for brewmasters. And lastly, koji, which is a little mold that actually helps with the fermentation process for sake. So it's a very unique beverage, sulfite-free, gluten-free, tannin-free, so it has become very popular for health-conscious people as a beverage of choice just because of its purity. And we have the opportunity to share that with our guests at our restaurants.
Well, I love it. I mean, and I'm a fan, and I've been drinking sake for a long time. And by the way, speaking of a long time, I mean, how long does the brewing culture go back? Like, how many thousands of years ago did the Japanese start brewing it?
So it's actually a couple of thousand years.
Yeah.
I mean, even if you go back a couple of 100 years, most households in Japan, they would brew and ferment a very rudimentary form of sake. If you think about the samurai, right, before they were going to battle, they were certainly drinking sake in an unfiltered form, which seems very cloudy, and you still can get that style of sake. It's called nigori sake, which translates to cloudy. You can find that. So it's a very ancient beverage, similar to how the Egyptians were drinking beer, and people in Greece were drinking wine and making wine. Japan has a very strong culture and tradition, so it's used for ritual ceremonies, weddings, and that's why it's very important for us to celebrate World Sake Day with all of our guests, because it's a reminder that October marks the beginning of the brewing season, and then throughout the whole month of October, we're going to be talking about sake, and we're going to be sharing sake and creating food with sake as well.
I want to come back to that, and let me just ask you this: there's the challenge, I think, and you could relate to this because you have an expertise in beverages in general. I know that you're in the process of becoming like a master sommelier. The thing is, if you walk into an average restaurant, you're confronted with a wine list. I mean, most people really aren't even that comfortable with a wine list, and yet it's in English. By the time you go into a Japanese restaurant and you have a sake list, it's really kind of intimidating, frankly, because you really don't have a clue. So just for the general kind of public, for the purpose of clarification, there's a whole lot of different sake out there. You know what I mean? I might like a Junmai or a Daiginjo or whatever, but like, what should people, generally speaking, what are some of the general rules or advice that you would give people on like how to go in and taste and try different sakes?
So that's a great question, and it's something we talk with our servers and managers all the time. Basically, it starts with having people switch from just drinking hot sake at our restaurants. Yes, during the month of October, we're going to have $1 sake shots, but it's a very specific group of guests who just want to have a good time. For them to try and pay a little bit more for better sake, we try to do a couple of things. First, we try to talk about some of the traditions that are important in Japanese to kind of break the ice a little bit. So in Japan, for example, if we're sitting together at the same table, I never let you pour your own sake, right? I would pour it for you. So during our Sushi Sake 101 classes, we try to instill that with our guests, that sake, there's a cultural aspect to that. But then when it comes to actually exploring the sake, we have a sake flight that we like to recommend to our guests, where they can find different textures and different degrees of dryness and sweetness. So the most important thing for us is to get people comfortable with a little bit the language, and no different than wine, where a lot of people started drinking white Zinfandel before they actually moved on to Chardonnay or Sauvignon Blanc. There's actually some sake that will drink naturally sweeter. So we start to try, if you're a wine connoisseur, we may give you a Daiginjo, which is a very aromatic, elegant type of sake. But if we notice that perhaps you never tried sake before, we're going to start you with something a little bit sweet. Sparkling sake is becoming very popular. Has a little bit of sweetness, and we would recommend those with your spicy dishes. So you come to Ra Sushi, say, I'm going to have the spicy tuna roll, then we would naturally go to the sweeter sake. If you have something like sashimi or nigiri, we would go for the higher end, more delicate, more aromatic product.
Before I ask you about pairing in general, since you brought up the whole hot versus cold thing, I will tell you that once I started drinking cold sake, and I'm going back some years, I never ever ordered hot again. So tell people a little bit about, the hot versus cold situation. What should people really know?
So basically, what has happened is not so much that you were drinking the sake hot, but perhaps it was too hot. In Japan, when you look at how they drink sake throughout the year, they will actually warm some type of sake up during the winter time, just to keep themselves warm up. So more often than not, what happens is that we give it to you boiling hot, and nobody cares about the temperature or the type of sake that you're warming up. And then sake has had a bad reputation because a lot of people tend to put the not so great sake on it. And so I think that, during the summer times in Japan, they would drink the lighter, drier type of sake, the fresher style. So I think, temperature is super important for that matter. I would say that warm sake, warmed the right way, with the right quality, would be great with a grilled steak, and you would be very surprised. The aromatic sake would be with cheese. And so one of the things that we are doing at Ra Sushi is during the month of October, we're actually going to pair a spiked sake roll. Our chefs, wanted to celebrate the event that Sake Month is coming up, so they came up with a sake roll, which basically we marinate tuna in sake and a sweet soy base. Then we basically wrap it with rice and seaweed. We put 2 different kinds of tuna on top, and then we're going to pair that with a nigori sake infused with cucumber. So we want people to experience texture, versatility, and good flavor, more importantly.
What are some of the other are there some other kind of classic, pairings?
Yes. So again, so we hot sake would go, and in general is defined by the grade of sake. But when you're looking at the more refined type of sake, which tend to be more aromatic, you want to pair those similar to how you would pair a Riesling or a Gewürztraminer. So you're talking about lighter dishes, a little bit of citrus component to them, and then again, the more spicy, heavier spice dishes, we tend to go with a heavier, sweeter nigori sake, or even sparkling sake, because it's very versatile. One pairing that I think is sometimes not talked much about is with fried food. So hot sake, actually, also worn properly with tempura, is a very good combination.
Nice. That's good to know. Yeah, I like that. That's a good call. Where is tell folks where? Let's do it two ways. We can tell them certainly where to find you online with your website. But where are I think Ra, if I'm not mistaken, is the largest kind of chain of sushi restaurants in the country. Where are you located in the United States of America?
So we have restaurants from Florida, Arizona. We have a high concentration of restaurants. California, but we go all the way to Leawood, Kansas, Baltimore, and Chicago. So we're pretty much all over the place. Our website is www.rasushi.com if anyone is interested in learning more about us. And again, the reason why we want to celebrate Sake Month is just because we want people to be open at trying new things. Our environment is very casual. We want people to come in, have fun. On October 21st, which is actually the anniversary of our birthday, is when we're going to be hosting Sake Sushi 101 rolling classes. So
nice.
You can bring a group of friends, get dirty, roll your own sushi roll, and then we're going to give you some sake as well so that you can explore different types. And, we have a very high and very energetic group of individuals helping us take care of our guests. And we even have a social media contest where you can go onto Facebook, Instagram, tag yourself saying Kampai. I don't know if everybody knows, but Kampai is actually the classic toast that you do when you're drinking sake. And you take a photograph, you tag us, and then you can win some gift certificates. And, we just like to keep good memories of our guests coming to our restaurants. Nice,
Alfredo. Well done. All right, so we got a little Kampai. We got October is a big month. The 21st is a big day for you guys, and I will remind people when I go back onto the show here that it'll be easy to find you and look for your places, and that's very helpful stuff. Any last words of advice in general about drinking sake?
No, thank you. I would say my only recommendation is explore sake. I would say that your servers in any restaurant or situations will be a very good guide for you. And just think about it the same way as you learn how to drink wine or beer. I don't think most people like beer the first time they tried it, but
right.
kind of practice, helped you develop a palate. And now I'm sure that a lot of people at the end of a hard working day, they say, I can't wait to have a drink of X, Y, or Z. I think that can happen with sake. We're just very excited to be able to help spreading the good word and gospel of sake. And thank you so much for the opportunity to talk to you.
Thank you, Alfredo. Appreciate it, and glad to learn about the product and about Rasushi. And I'm looking forward to October.
Thank you so much.
All right, appreciate it. Thank you too.
Okay.
So long. Bye.
Well, there you have it, my friends. A little bit of everything this evening. Some England, fancy restaurant. Wow, that was good. Some Paris, France. Always a delight there. All good. A little recipe for this time of year. A discussion of sake, that kind of thing. Episode 27. All you can eat. Coming to you as I do from New York City, New York. This is your host, Rob Rosenthal, author of Short Order Dad, One Guy's Guide to Making Food Fun and Hassle-Free. Feel free to pick that book up. Very well reviewed, and a valuable asset to any kitchen for those looking to kind of up their game. I offer up, a formula for getting the most taste with the fewest ingredients and the least effort. 100 recipes and a whole lot of instructional stuff, how-to stuff that I've infused with what sense of humor I have. Good evening from here until next week at this time. Remember, life is short, so never waste a meal.
I'm the Teflon Pan Man. I'm the Teflon Pan Man. Ain't nothing gonna stick on